The trail into Elkmont doesn't feel like an entrance. It feels like permission. The paved road narrows, trees closing from both sides, their branches arched overhead like ribs. Even in daylight, the place feels dim, like the sun doesn't quite reach the ground the way it should. Most people come during the day. They walk the loop. They take photos of the cabins. They leave before the light starts to fade. But Elkmont doesn't change when night comes. It waits. There are no gates, no signs warning you away once the park officially closes. Just empty roads and buildings that still look lived in. The cabins sit in neat rows, porches sagging, paint peeled down to bare wood. Rocking chairs are frozen mid-sway. Curtains hang in windows, sun-bleached and brittle, like someone meant to come back and never did. And when the forest goes quiet, it doesn't do it naturally. The crickets stop first, then the birds. Then even the wind seems to pull back. Silence presses in, thick and unnatural, until you hear your own breathing echo off the cabin walls. People who stay too long report the same thing. It starts with footsteps. Not behind you, inside the buildings. Slow, deliberate steps moving across wooden floors that haven't been walked on in decades. Not running, not pacing, just walking. Like something moving from room to room, checking on a house that still belongs to them. Some say they hear doors open. Others hear a porch swing begin to creak, back and forth, long after the air has gone still. One visitor described standing in front of cabin 27, watching the porch light flicker on. There was no power. They stood there frozen, staring at the glow behind the glass until the light clicked off again, like someone realized they were being watched. Another account comes from a couple who wandered at dusk, ignoring the unease creeping up their spines. They laughed at first, took pictures, made jokes about ghost towns and old vacation homes, until they heard a child's voice. Not crying, not laughing, just softly humming. It drifted from one of the cabins behind them, steady and calm, the sound of someone who felt safe, someone who belonged there. When they turned around, every cabin door on the row was open. All at once. No footsteps, no warnings. Just doors yawning wide, dark interiors staring back like open mouths. They left without speaking. No one ran. No one screamed. They didn't look back. Because Elkmont didn't chase you. It doesn't have to. It lets you walk away with the feeling that you were never alone. And that something was disappointed you didn't stay longer. Tonight, we're going deeper into Elkmont Ghost Town. The history they teach, and the stories they don't. Welcome back to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. Tonight we're walking into a place that was never meant to be forgotten, but somehow was. Tucked deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, where the forest presses close and the air feels heavier than it should, sits Elkmont. Once a thriving logging town, then a summer retreat, and now a quiet collection of decaying cabins, slowly being reclaimed by the woods. By day, Elkmont looks abandoned. By night, it feels watched. Visitors report footsteps on empty porches, doors that slam with no wind, laughter echoing from houses that haven't had residents in decades, and the feeling, strong and unmistakable, that whatever stayed behind never left. Tonight we're covering the history, the hauntings, and the unsettling encounters tied to Elkmont Ghost Town, a place where time stalled but spirits may linger. I'm your host, Cupcake, so settle in, lower the lights, and let's take a walk where the mountains keep their secrets. Before Elkmont was a ghost town, it was a promise. Long before tourists wandered its cracked sidewalks, before cameras and caution signs, the land was part of the ancestral home of the Cherokee people. The forests, rivers, and ridges weren't empty. They were lived in, respected, and understood. When the Cherokee were forcibly removed during the Trail of Tears in the 1830s, the mountains didn't forget. They rarely do. By the late 1800s, outside interests moved in, not for beauty, but for timber. The Smoky Mountains were dense with old-growth forest, and logging companies saw opportunity where others saw wilderness. That's when Little River Lumber Company arrived. Elkmont began as a logging town, built quickly and with purpose. Narrow-gauge railroads cut through the mountains. Trees that had stood for centuries were felled in days. Temporary housing went up for workers and their families, along with a hotel, general store, and post office. Life here was hard, loud, and dangerous. Men worked long hours in the forest. Injuries were common. Death wasn't rare. But Elkmont didn't stay rough for long. As logging profits grew, company executives began building vacation homes nearby, separate from the laborers. These weren't shacks. They were cabins meant for leisure, fresh air, cool summers, a retreat from city life. Soon, Elkmont shifted identities. By the early 1900s, it had become a resort community. Wealthy families from Knoxville and beyond arrived early summer. Porches filled with laughter. Children played along the Little River. Social clubs formed, including the exclusive Appalachian Club, where members gathered for dances, dinners, and long evenings that stretched deep into the night. The cabins were never meant to be permanent homes. They were seasonal, temporary, and yet people grew attached. Generations returned to the same cabins year after year. Names were carved into the door frames. Furniture was passed down. Traditions took root. Elkmont wasn't just a vacation spot anymore. It was a second life. Then the government stepped in. In the 1920s and 30s, plans for what would become Great Smoky Mountains National Park began to take shape. The land Elkmont sat on was included. The government purchased the property, including the cabins, but allowed residents to remain under lifetime leases. At first, it didn't seem like a problem. But time doesn't stop for anyone. As leaseholders aged and passed away, cabins were left empty. Maintenance stopped. Porches sagged. Roofs leaked. Paint peeled. The forest began creeping back in. By the 1990s, Elkmont was mostly abandoned. An abandonment does something to places. It leaves things unfinished. Cabins still held furniture. Dishes sat in cupboards. Curtains hung in windows. It didn't look like people had moved out. It looked like they had stepped away and planned to return. But no one did. For years, Elkmont was sealed off. Visitors weren't allowed inside. The cabins decayed quietly, hidden behind trees and vines. Locals whispered about strange sounds drifting from the area. Voices, movement, lights where there shouldn't be any. When the park finally reopened Elkmont to the public in the early 2000s, the stories came with it. People said the place felt wrong, heavy, unsettled. Some believe spirits remained, former residents unwilling to leave the only home they ever loved. Others believed the land itself was disturbed, layered with grief from displacement and death. The National Park Service debated demolishing the cabins entirely, but something stopped them. Preservation efforts began instead, not restoration, preservation. Holding the structures in a state between decay and survival, a decision that left Elkmont suspended in time. Not alive, not gone. Today, Elkmont stands as one of the most well-known ghost towns in Appalachia, not because of how it died, but because of how much is still there. The walls, the floors, the porches, and according to those who visit after dark, the presence. Because history doesn't just live in books. Sometimes it stays right where it happened. Elkmont doesn't behave like a haunted house. It doesn't jump out. It doesn't chase. It doesn't try to scare you. It continues. People who visit Elkmont expecting something dramatic often leave confused. They didn't see an apparition. They didn't hear a scream. What they felt instead was persistence. A sense that the town was still following a schedule no one had bothered to cancel. The first thing people notice is movement without presence. Footsteps are the most common report. Not running, not hurried. Slow steps crossing the wooden floors inside cabins that have been empty for decades. The sound is unmistakable. Weight on wood, heel to toe. Yet when visitors take a look inside, there's nothing there. No dust disturbed, no shadows passing, just the echo of someone still going room to room. Those footsteps almost always stop when noticed. Not fade, not drift away. They stop, mid-stride, like whatever was walking suddenly realized it wasn't alone anymore. That's the moment most people feel watched. Elkmont doesn't announce itself. It reacts. Porches are another focal point. People describe stepping onto a cabin porch and feeling an immediate shift in pressure. The air thickens, sounds dull. The forest seems to pull back, as if the porch marks a boundary the town still recognizes. Porch swings move on their own, even on nights when the air is completely still. The motion is gentle and repetitive, never wild. Back and forth, like muscle memory. Some visitors swear they hear the soft creak of rocking chairs moving in rhythm, though no chairs are visible from outside. Others hear floorboards responding to weight that isn't there. One board at a time. Deliberate. Familiar. Windows matter too. Lights have been reported flickering on inside cabins with no electricity. Curtains shift, not like they're caught in a breeze, but like someone brushed past them. Faces aren't seen clearly, only the suggestion of someone standing just out of view. When people move closer, the activity stops. That's another pattern. Elkmont doesn't escalate when people approach. It retreats. At least, at first. Time plays a role here. Activity increases at dusk, peaks shortly after nightfall, then settles into something quieter but heavier. Visitors often describe the feeling of being tolerated during the early evening, like guests who overstayed but haven't been asked to leave yet. Then the silence comes. Not natural silence, controlled silence. Crickets stop chirping, wind drops, even the river nearby seems quieter. That's when the footsteps return. Not inside one cabin, but across several. Sounds move in parallel with people walking the paths, always just out of sight, always maintaining distance. No pursuit, no closing in. Just accompaniment. Some describe it as being escorted. The town seems particularly sensitive to thresholds, crossing from outside to inside. Even just stepping into a doorway triggers stronger reactions. Doors slam only after someone steps inside. Footsteps increase when someone lingers. The sense of being watched sharpens when a person turns their back to the interior of a cabin. As if Elkmont allows observation, but not occupation. Those who touch objects, chairs, railings, or old furniture, report immediate discomfort, nausea, dizziness, a sudden urge to leave. It's rarely fear at first. It's wrongness, like holding something that doesn't belong to you. People who take objects often experience problems afterwards. Nightmares, sounds in their homes, or feelings of being followed. Several accounts claim activity stopped only after the items were returned. Elkmont remembers what's taken. Children's voices are occasionally reported, though never loudly. Soft humming, quiet speech just beyond comprehension. Always calm, always close, never panicked. That detail unsettles people the most because it suggests contentment. There are no reports of screaming children, no cries for help. Only voices that sound like they're exactly where they're meant to be. Visitors who mock the location, laughing, provoking, daring something to happen, report the fastest escalation. Sounds grow louder, doors slam hard enough to rattle frames. The feeling of dread spikes sharply, not slowly. People leave shaking, sometimes without remembering the walk back to their cars. Elkmont doesn't respond well to disrespect. But it doesn't respond with rage either. It responds like a homeowner correcting behavior. There are no stories of physical attacks, no scratches, no violent encounters. Instead, people describe being overwhelmed with an urge to leave, as if the town simply decided their visit was over. That's the pattern. Elkmont doesn't harm, it dismisses. And that may be the most unsettling behavior of all, because dismissal implies authority. Whatever remains here behaves like it still owns the place, like it still knows where everything belongs, like it recognizes routine and boundaries. The cabins aren't abandoned to them. They're occupied, just not by the living. And once you realize that, Elkmont feels less like a place you're visiting and more like a place that's watching you decide when to leave. Elkmont cannot be separated from the Smoky Mountains. Not geographically, not historically, and not spiritually. The Smokies don't behave like ordinary mountains. They trap sound. They hold moisture. Fog rolls in without warning and settles low, thick enough to erase distance and depth. At times, the forest feels closer than it should, like the land itself is leaning in. This is a range known for disappearance. People vanish here. Sounds vanish here. Paths vanish here. And Elkmont sits directly inside that pattern. The mountains around Elkmont create a natural enclosure. Ridges rise on all sides, funneling air, sound, and weather into the valley. Fog doesn't drift through, it pools. At night, it gathers between the cabins, wrapping the porches and steps until the structures feel half buried, like they're already being reclaimed. Visitors often report losing their sense of direction, even on marked paths. Familiar landmarks look wrong. Distances stretch or compress. A cabin that seemed close suddenly feels far away, as if the space between it has thickened. That disorientation is known as Smoky Mountains phenomenon. The Cherokee believed these mountains were layered, that not everything existed on the same plane. Some paths cross between worlds, especially in places where water, fog, and elevation met. Elkmont sits at that intersection. The little river runs through the area, constant and low, masking sound. Moving water here doesn't just soothe, it erases. Footsteps blend into it, voices vanish into it. The river becomes a boundary sound, blurring what's natural and what isn't. The Smokies are also unnaturally quiet when they want to be. There's a moment hikers talk about when the forest turns off. No insects, no birds, no wind. That silence isn't peaceful. It's alert. Predators cause silence. So does presence. Elkmont experiences that silence often. And when it happens, the cabins don't feel empty. They feel attentive. The wood used to build Elkmont came from these mountains. The trees were cut, shaped, and raised just feet from where they once grew. That matters. Structures built from local timber behave differently, according to Appalachian belief. They remember the land they came from. Elkmont cabins aren't imports. They're extensions. The Smokies are known for holding on to tragedy. Accidents, deaths, disappearances. Stories that linger long after details fade. Search and rescue teams report hearing voices calling their names. Campers describe lights moving through the trees where no trails exist. People feel watched in places with no visibility. Elkmont mirrors these reports. The same behaviors, the same patterns, the same silence before something happens. Fog is one of the strongest amplifiers here. In the Smokies, fog isn't just weather, it's a condition. It warps distance, muffles sounds, and creates the illusion of movement. Shadows shift, forms appear and vanish. At Elkmont, fog fills cabins through broken windows and open doors, making it impossible to tell where the structure ends and where the forest begins. Inside that fog, people report feeling surrounded. Not threatened, observed. The Smoky Mountains are also known for enforcing respect. Locals say the land punishes arrogance. Those who ignore warnings, stray off trails, or mock the mountains often encounter problems: injury, confusion, sudden fear, or the overwhelming urge to leave. Elkmont follows the same rule set. The town doesn't attack, the mountains don't chase, they correct. The longer someone resists that correction, the stronger the response becomes. Not violent, but absolute. People describe panic without cause, the feeling that staying is dangerous, even if nothing is happening. That sensation doesn't feel emotional. It feels imposed, as if the land made the decision for you. This is why Elkmont doesn't need legends to be unsettling. It's embedded in a region already saturated with stories of vanishing, watching, and silence. The town simply gives those qualities walls and floors. Cabins become containers. Porches become thresholds. Windows become points of contact. And the forest presses in around all of that, patient and unmoving. The Smokies don't forget what they absorb. Every footprint, every voice, every life lived briefly in their valleys becomes part of their terrain. Elkmont wasn't abandoned into nothing. It was abandoned into something that was already waiting. That's what makes this place different from other ghost towns. It isn't isolated. It's supported. Held in a place by mountains that don't release what they take. And when you stand in Elkmont long enough, especially as the light fades and the fog rises, you don't feel like you've stepped into history. You feel like you've stepped into a living system, one that noticed you the moment you arrived. And once the Smoky Mountains notice you, they don't stop paying attention. Silence in Elkmont is not the absence of sound. It's the removal of permission. The Smoky Mountains are normally alive with noise. Wind through the leaves, insects humming, water moving over rock. When that sound vanishes, it doesn't feel peaceful. It feels deliberate, like something decided it was time to listen instead. People talk about that moment the forest goes quiet as if it flips a switch. 1 second, the woods are normal. The next, everything stops. No gradual fade, no warning, just stillness so complete it presses against your ears. In Elkmont, that silence settles differently. It doesn't hover above the ground. It sinks. The first thing people notice is their own breathing. It sounds too loud, too intrusive, like they're interrupting something private. Every step feels exaggerated. The snap of a twig echoes longer than it should. Even swallowing feels like a noise. Fear follows quietly. Not panic, not adrenaline. Awareness. People become acutely conscious of where they're standing, how they feel, and how many dark windows are around them. Cabins that look quaint in the daylight now feel like blind spots, places something could stand without being seen. The fear in Elkmont doesn't rush you. It waits until you realize you're surrounded. Surrounded by structures that once held families. surrounded by rooms that once echoed voices, surrounded by places that were never meant to be empty. And then the feeling shifts. Visitors describe a sensation of pressure, like the air itself is leaning inward. Some report dizziness. Others feel suddenly cold, even in warmer weather. A few have experienced the overwhelming urge to remain perfectly still, as if movement would attract attention. That fear isn't imagined. In the wild, silence means something is near. Predators quiet their environment. Prey goes still. Your body knows this, even if your mind tries to dismiss it. In Elkmont, that instinct activates fully. People stop speaking without realizing it. Conversations die mid-sentence. Laughter disappears. Groups instinctively huddle closer together. Flashlights shake slightly, beams jittering across cabin walls and dark doorways. That's when the fear deepens, because the silence doesn't stay empty. Soft sounds begin to emerge, not loud enough to break the stillness, but distinct enough to be noticed. A floorboard settling, a porch creaking, the faintest suggestion of movement just beyond vision. These sounds don't repeat constantly. They happen once, then stop. That's what unsettles people the most. It feels intentional. Fear escalates when people realize the silence reacts. When they stop moving, the environment seems to adjust. When they whisper, the sounds respond. When they turn their back to the cabins, the sensation of being watched sharpens. The fear becomes personal. Not something happening around you, but something happening to you. People describe a moment when their thoughts change. Logic fades. Time becomes slippery. Minutes stretch. Seconds feel thick. The path back suddenly seems longer than it should be. Some experience auditory disorientations, footsteps that sync with their own but fall half a beat behind. Others feel vibrations through the ground, subtle enough to question, strong enough to notice. No one reports running. Running would mean acknowledging pursuit. Instead, people walk faster, breath shallow, eyes scanning every dark window and doorway. Fear tightens in a singular thought: I need to leave. Not because something happened, but because something might. That's the fear that Elkmont creates. The kind of fear that doesn't release when nothing occurs, because the nothing feels full. Visitors often say the worst part comes afterwards. Back in their cars, back on the road, back in the normal noise and light. Their bodies relax, but their minds don't. They replay the silence. The way it felt like being singled out. The way it seemed to notice them. The way it didn't need to do anything else. Elkmont doesn't scare people with spectacle. It scares them by making them feel visible in a place that shouldn't be paying attention at all. And once you felt that kind of silence, every quiet place feels different afterward. Elkmont doesn't offer proof the way people expect proof. There are no clear photographs, no recordings that settle anything, no moment where everyone agrees on what's happening. Instead, there's consistency. Independent visitors, separated by years, report the same sensations, the same sounds, the same moments of unease clustered in the same places. Cabins that trigger reactions repeatedly. Paths that feel heavier than others. Windows people avoid without knowing why. That repetition matters. Evidence in places like Elkmont isn't visual, it's behavioral. The most common explanation offered is residual energy, not as the theory of ghost, but as the concept of imprint. Repeated human activity leaving behind something like an echo. Footsteps that cross the same floor, doors that open the same way. Movements without awareness. But residual energy alone doesn't explain reaction. Elkmont doesn't just replay, it responds. Another explanation is place memory. The idea that environments saturated with emotion, routine, and attachment retain influence. Elkmont wasn't a site of sudden catastrophe. It was a place of habit. Summer after summer, generation after generation. That kind of repetition ingrains itself deeply. People didn't leave Elkmont in panic. They left slowly, reluctantly, one by one. That kind of loss doesn't rupture. It lingers. Environmental explanations exist too, but they don't negate experience. They deepen it. The Smoky Mountains fog bends sound and light. Moisture warps wood. Temperature shifts create movement and noise. Silence amplifies perception. But perception alone doesn't explain pattern. Why the same cabins? Why the same times? Why the same reactions to boundaries? Psychological explanation suggests suggestion and expectation, and many visitors arrive skeptical. Some don't even know the stories. They still feel the pressure, still experience the silence, still leave early. Expectation doesn't explain first contact. Another framework is the idea of territorial awareness, not spirits in the traditional sense, but something akin to guardianship. A sense of ownership that persists without a physical owner. Not anger, not malice, just presence. The Cherokee spoke of places where the veil thinned, not because of death, but because of alignment. Water, fog, elevation. Elkmont meets all three. In those places, awareness travels more easily. Things are closer than they should be. That doesn't mean ghosts walk the cabins. It means the space itself may be awake. The strongest evidence remains human response. People don't panic. They don't hallucinate wildly. They behave similarly. Voices drop, movements slow, instinct takes over. The decision to leave feels external, not fear-driven, but compelled. That's not how imagination works usually. Imagination excites, Elkmont suppresses. Even skeptics report the same thing afterward. Reluctance to return, difficulty explaining why, and that sense that they were intruding on something unfinished. Evidence doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's the way a place teaches you how to behave while you're still standing in it. Elkmont doesn't ask to be believed. It only asks to be respected. And for people who visit, that feels like the safest option. Elkmont doesn't leave you with answers. It leaves you with impressions, with quiet moments that feel heavier than they should, with the sense that some places don't need to do anything to be remembered. If you've ever experienced something strange in the Smoky Mountains, if you felt watched on a trail, heard something that didn't make sense, or left a place without knowing why you needed to go, I want to hear it. You can submit your experiences to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls at gmail.com. That's Hexes, Haunts, and Howls, all one word, at gmail.com. All stories can remain anonymous. Sometimes the mountains don't take people. Sometimes they just leave a mark on them. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.